welcome to another episode of the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. So people who stage manage and music direct and design and run the soundboard in the back and play instruments. All of the people who go largely unnoticed in the theater world. I have been doing this podcast for about a year and a half now, and it's been such a good thing in my life, especially during these past few months of the coronavirus. And it's given me an opportunity to connect with people and talk about theater, during a time where theater isn't happening. And, I don't have gigs and I don't have rehearsals, and it can get lonely and discouraging to feel cut off from that community and cut off from what I love to do. I'm so grateful for all of the people who have sat down and talked with me on this podcast, but I think the people who I've talked with during this pandemic time, I appreciate just a little more because I need this. It's been so helpful for me to connect with people, and I'm so grateful. Ann McPherson is one of those people that I'm grateful for because she agreed to sit down and talk with me about stage management and a host of other good topics. I like talking to stage managers. I think they're vital. They're just so vital to the success of a show. And I have such admiration for stage management. That's a job I do not want to do. So I'm glad that there are people out there that love doing it and are passionate about it. If you like the Backstage Creative, I would love it if you would head on over to Apple Music and leave a rating or a review. Come on over to Facebook and like the Backstage Creative page. Find me on Instagram. Reach out to me. Let me know what you think of the show. I would love to hear from you. Here we go. Here's my conversation with Ann McPherson. What have you been up to these past 4 months?
I mean, a lot of stuff and almost nothing at all. Everything shut down, right? And then it was a question of what of the things would continue but in a different form, and what new things are possible. To date, no new things have been possible. I've been seeing some friends do some really interesting project things. And then I had a project that I had booked before everything fell apart, which did pivot to a completely streaming situation, and I was retained. I was kept on, and my contract was actually extended. I was supposed to do 2 weeks on contract, and I ended up doing 4 weeks on contract for this project, because there was a very logical and real understanding that preparing things ahead of time for an online streaming situation actually takes more labor when everyone isn't in the same room and working on the same schedule and has different life boundaries and all of those things. So it ended up being a little more work than it was supposed to be, which was one of the many interesting things about pivoting to streaming. But for the most part, I've just been filling my time with running and reading and staying safe. I live in New York City. I live in Brooklyn. So there's been a lot of staying inside and staying safe and finding ways not to go crazy.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Events that are being streamed. Did you feel like your event was effective? Did you have a good audience? What has been your experience with, either like audience engagement or generating revenue through like streamed events?
Well, that's a question that I actually can't, I can't tie a bow on my experience because we postponed. We worked for 4 weeks. We worked for the entire month of May, and we were set to stream on June 1st, which, if your personal calendar feels as, present as mine does, that we were about 10 days into just the huge, overwhelming outpouring of national grief and feelings and experience about the murder of George Floyd. And because it was a fundraiser for an institution that historically really tries to have its finger on the pulse, the more that we worked and finessed and made it almost ready to stream, we were teching it the weekend before, all of this stuff, the more effort that we put into it, the more tone deaf it continued to feel. We ended up not streaming. We ended up doing a short statement from the artistic director of the institution and the director of the event, speaking to the national feeling, and said, you're not going to see any of the content that we produced. And so everything is sitting on a shelf right now. So I don't know anything about audience engagement in terms of that event, or fundraising for that matter, because it was meant to be a fundraiser. We did not ask for money, of course. So that was also a really interesting, like specifically as a stage manager, you have a lot of experience stopping a show. And I always describe the experience as like trying to personally put the brakes on a moving train, right? And it felt very much the same. And it was really interesting because there was a huge range of feelings amongst all of the people that had put in as many hours as I had and been really hands-on in terms of putting together the event. And for the most part, the feelings that people were running past me were feelings of, oh my God, I can't believe we put in all of this work and now we're not going to do it. It's for the right reasons, but it still feels crazy. And for me, I didn't feel crazy about it. I'm very used to stopping a show, and I was confident that it was for the right reasons. And so like, it's the same thing as like when a piece of automation breaks and you can't continue because it's a huge safety issue, right? The correct thing to do is stop the show, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so like, I had no crazy feelings about it. It was exactly the right thing to do. But also, nobody has seen any of the content that we produced for it.
And that's not to say that it's not wasted, right? Like hopefully at some point it'll come out, or something else will spring out of the work that you guys did. I think during seasons like this, it's easy to feel like things are being wasted when maybe they're just lying
Oh,
dormant for a
yeah.
while.
Yeah. I feel no regret or sense of waste about any of it. I don't feel like the month of work was wasted. We learned so much about creating streaming content, working with a live production company. We're going to have live elements, and the whole thing was going to be put together in a live capacity. It was a really interesting and fruitful month of work, and a very creative time also for all of the people that contributed. We had about 120 performers and a number of creative teams collaborating, and it was just an incredibly productive time. And the decision not to stream any of it was the right decision. So whether or not anyone sees it, the work still matters, right? Like, the activity of doing the work is half of all of it, right? Like, we're not just doing it for everybody else's benefit. We are also growing as artists ourselves. And so I have no regrets, and I certainly don't feel like we wasted our time.
Yeah, that's such a great outlook to have on the situation.
I'm a friend of mine calls me Silver Linings Anne.
Oh, I love
I
it.
can I can always sort of, I maybe it's a survival technique, right? Like, if you can always find a good reason for something, then you can survive anything that's incredibly challenging. But I do tend to spin pretty positive. I'm not going to lie. Not that I don't see the reality of situations. I absolutely see things for what they are, I think. But I also try to look at things as any sort of learning opportunity or opportunity for growth or anything like that. I don't know.
I'm sure that skill or that characteristic that you have comes in handy as a stage manager. And it seems like stage managers get the most stressful situations, right? Like those are reserved for you guys to figure out and to navigate through. I mean, besides, being maybe a natural optimist, how do you navigate through really stressful, either like relationships with actors, or things aren't getting done on time, or the schedule's off, or how do you navigate the stressfulness that can maybe come with being a stage manager?
I have so many complicated feelings that come up. As the question unfolded, I had all of these different thoughts that I feel like I may or may not unpack successfully. Stage managers are in a leadership position, right? And so as leaders, there were a couple of things that came up. You said when you're having a challenging conversation with an actor, or a challenging relationship with an actor, or the schedule's wrong, or I can't remember what the third example was, because then I was processing all of these feelings that were coming up. But take the example of the challenging conversation or relationship with an actor, right? Everyone, every single human being in the world thinks that they are the hero of their own story. A stage manager has made whatever decisions that they've made, which are being confronted by that actor, who has made this series of decisions that they have made that are in conflict with that decision. And that is what is sort of leading to whatever this conflict is, right? And so as the person in the leadership position, having confidence in the decisions that you personally have made is really important. But I think also being able to listen to what the actor or whoever is having conflict with you, right? Like as stage managers also, we interact more with every single human in the building. And so we have active, ongoing relationships with literally everyone. So the conflict could be with anyone. It could be with an actor. It could be with a dresser. It could be with someone in the pit. It could be a porter, someone who's responsible for cleaning the dressing rooms. It could be with truly anyone. And that person has made their decisions for a reason. And so being able to understand where that person is coming from and not be so defensive as to not believe that the decisions that you have made with the strength of your conviction and your understanding of the situation can't be flexible enough to accommodate the needs of that person who happens to be pushing back on it, right? That's, I think that is where leadership skills come in. Not being defensive, being able to listen, and knowing the reasons behind things. I always say, ask why, right? Like nothing matters if it doesn't answer the why of any given question. So when I come into a show, a lot of the things that I'm learning as I am growing into whatever my role happens to be on that show, I'm constantly asking the question why and trying to find solutions that accommodate the specific needs, not just saying because. Sorry, that it was a question about having a conflict with another person. And then like, what if the schedule is wrong, right? Great. I'm also a human being. And that's something that I really proactively am constantly messaging, that of course I'm always going to try and get it right, but also I'm a human being and I don't believe in martyrdom, right? And so there was a mistake. Is there time to correct that mistake, or do we have to find a solution to the fact that the schedule has already been distributed? Maybe there are financial consequences that can't be borne if we change it at this point, right? Because different unions have different rules about notification and things like that. Or maybe it's so important that we maintain the schedule as originally designed, which then I screwed up before I distributed it, that we have to take that financial hit and then I have to own that mistake, not pay for it, of course, because I'm a member of a union and I wouldn't have to pay for it. But, like that's a relationship that I would have with the producers. And I am just a human being and I am going to make mistakes. And then it's a matter of how you move forward from making those mistakes. And denying or being defensive is truly a waste of energy in both of those examples, I would say. Yeah. I think I've worked that one to death, probably.
No, I love it. You're saying all good things. So let's ramble away. I love it.
I am a bit of a rambler. I'm sorry.
A podcast is the best place to ramble. It was like made for ramblers,
I think that's why I like listening to podcasts so much. Like I said, I've been running a lot. I don't listen to music when I run anymore. I listened when I first started training to sort of get a sense of like what my rhythms should be and how my breathing should work. And as soon as I sort of like got into a groove in terms of how my body works, I immediately switched back to podcasts because it's like the best use of that time out there on my feet is just to listen to other people rambling on about whatever it is that they happen to know about that I could benefit from learning more about. It's such a joy for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a runner too, and I have a similar like experience. I used to listen to music a lot when I ran, but then I found it kind of messed up my cadence. Like when it would go to a different song, and it was a different tempo. Like I
Oh
would
my
kind
God,
of
it
get
does, doesn't
all
it,
messed
right?
up. Yeah.
Yes, and especially, I mean, me, sort of a natural affinity for music. It's one of the it's not an obstacle that I have to personally overcome when I work on musicals. But you're actually a musician. I can't even imagine the effects that the tiniest change of rhythm from song to song would have on your body, because it's all like kinetic energy and muscle memory at a certain point. And I totally hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For sure.
So I would imagine that running is like a a way to like decompress and kind of, just do something different besides theater. Are there, and you mentioned reading too, are there any other things that you do just to take care of yourself personally, whether that's for mental health reasons or physical reasons or emotional reasons, just to keep yourself healthy to do your job?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest, most immediate answer to that question is food and cooking. I, I'm I'm obsessed with cooking. Obsession is the wrong word. It came out of my mouth very quickly, but it's the wrong word. There is something so stabilizing about every step of meal preparation for me, and like the routine that comes from planning, and then really the experience of making the food. Then I'm a very good cook, and so the experience of eating the food is always very good for me, unless I screw it up. I screwed up a meal last week, actually, and then I suffered through it because I also really, truly hate the concept of food waste and work really hard to avoid wasting food. So one of the starting points for when I even begin to plan my week's worth of meals ahead of time, but I start with what is in my fridge already. What is a leftover ingredient that I should use up before it goes bad, right? So that it doesn't go into the trash, it goes into more food. And then figuring out how to fold that into a meal that will give me the nourishment that I need for the week. Right now, the only nourishment that I really need, it has to do with sustaining my running routine, right? And so it's carb heavy and nutrient heavy and, like that sort of thing. And then I sort of plan my day out in terms of like what my training schedule is. When I'm in tech, what my body needs for nourishment is different. When I'm in rehearsal mode, what my body needs for nourishment is different. When I'm in just straight up performances, it depends on if we have a pudding rehearsal that week. Like my body just needs different things, and being able to provide myself with what I need is a major gift that I can give to myself. And so there isn't a single step of that entire process that doesn't add to my satisfaction in it. It's just an enormous part of my routine and my ritual, my day off ritual, if you will. It's all good for my soul, every piece of it.
I enjoy cooking a lot too, and I found myself doing even more of it during this season. Mostly, partly because I have more time to do it, but also just like it scratches that creative itch that I'm not able to scratch in my work. um,
Totally.
mhm.
Totally. And I also always say, like, you have people, especially young people, people that are coming up that maybe came from families that didn't necessarily cook a ton at home and who are like finding their way, and they have their first apartment. And because it's their first New York City apartment, the kitchen's really tiny. And so they just end up getting takeout. And then they look at me and my Tupperware and they say like the words, I hate these words so much. I'm so bad. I should be better and do what you do. And it's like, that sort of value judgment doesn't work for me, right? Because I'm doing something that works for me. And the only standard that you can hold yourself to is something that works for you. If you're a person that doesn't like to cook, don't cook. If you're a person that would go crazy because your kitchen is so tiny that you don't have the room to do the cooking that you want to do, then don't cook because that will make you miserable, right? Like there's no like comparing behavior is the worst. And so like what I'm jumping off of is you saying that it's like such a good creative outlet for you right now. Like all I want to do is yes and people doing the thing that makes them feel better and stronger and like they're doing the right thing for themselves. So when I say that cooking is like it scratches every possible itch for me, like you said, like if it doesn't scratch those itches, don't do it, right? Like there's no reason to do something that makes you unhappy, especially right now when we have so much time to make active choices about things that will be good for our souls.
Yeah, definitely, definitely, I agree with that. So, if you wouldn't mind, could you take us through your background? I'd love to hear where you're from, where you went to school, if you went to school somewhere, and then how you got to New York City.
Totally, totally. I just had this like flash of like starting at the very, very beginning, which like, why not? Who cares? I was born in California, which I say specifically because I actually grew up in Toronto, Canada. but I was born in California to American parents. My parents grew up in the tri-state area in New York and ended up in Toronto because my dad was teaching at the University of Toronto. And I happened to be born in California because he was doing a sabbatical year of research at the University of California at Irvine. So I have 5 older siblings, and all of us are dual citizens. A couple of us are triple citizens, but all of us have Canadian and U.S. citizenship. And I moved to the States sort of accidentally on purpose, because I started going to an arts camp in Michigan. It was called, when I started in the 80s, it was called National Music Camp, which was the original name for it. And now it's called Interlochen Arts Camp. And half of my family went there, by which I mean half of my siblings. My mom had also gone there. So it was sort of just like family tradition that was the camp that we all went to. All of us played instruments as kids. I played the piano. A bunch of us played piano, a bunch of us played other instruments. A bunch of us went to Interlochen, and I ended up also being a singer. So I was very much like in the arts community and in sort of the music end of things. And I sort of gravitated toward acting, even though I was not a very good actor, but there was an acting program at Interlochen, and I sort of ended up doing that casually in the summer times. I started doing the Shakespeare program as I got older, and that became an option. Because in Toronto at the time, in the entire province of Ontario, when I was still in high school, there were 5 years of high school. It was not a 4-year program. It was a 5-year program. And I was done. I was a really good student. I loved academics. I love learning. My parents are both educators. It wasn't about that. It was about wanting to start my life. And I didn't want to do 5 years of high school. And so I applied to the Interlochen Arts Academy, which is a year-round academic institution with an arts conservatory side that's on the same campus as the camp. And I got into the acting program at Interlochen Arts Academy, and I ended up doing my senior year, my 4th year of high school at Interlochen, and got my high school diploma. And because I was at an American boarding school, I was able easily, without any sort of confusion on the parts of the colleges and universities that I wanted to apply to U.S. colleges and universities in a way that would have been more challenging, with more hoops to jump through if I'd been applying from Toronto with a Canadian high school diploma. I did think to myself, even though I was in this conservatory environment, this is such a long version of this. I'm so sorry. I think that it's because we don't talk to people very much anymore. I text with people, and like I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but I don't. Anyway, sorry, my voice. I'm not used to hearing the sound of my voice, so it's just going on. So I was in this conservatory program for acting, even though I wasn't that great an actor, but I was in love with theater, and I was in love with creation, and it was scratching a lot of itches for me. But I did think to myself, which may have been my very first, like toe in the water of intersectionality. If I'm going to be in the arts and in theater, and maybe as my 16-year-old self thinking an actor, maybe I should be surrounded by people that aren't like me. Maybe going to a conservatory at the age of 17, 18 is like not the greatest choice. If I want to become a better rounded individual, I should know people that are different. And so I only applied to liberal arts programs. And I got into my first choice school, which was Reed College. And I went to Reed, and I got my bachelor's with an interdisciplinary degree in literature and theater. My freshman year of college was my first opportunity to stage manage. It was for a production of the Baltimore Waltz, which a friend of mine was directing. She just asked me casually if I wanted to be the stage manager because she didn't know anyone who was ever interested in doing that, and we were friends. And I said, sure. And over the winter break, I read a book about stage management, which I don't even remember which one it was. And I thought, okay, I'll try this. And in the heart of that experience, what I remember most was realizing that I was playing to all of my strengths without any of my insecurities. And I never looked back. So for that entire rest of the 3.5 years that I had left of college, while I was pursuing this liberal arts degree, I was the only person in the theater department at this liberal arts school that liked stage management. And so I did 5 productions a year. And I just every production, as long as it didn't conflict with the one that came before, I was the stage manager for the next one and the next one and the next one, because I was very aware that none of the very small faculty were really teaching me stage management and I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, I should actually, or I should say, I could benefit from a formal education in what stage management could be, especially because I come from a family of educators and all of my siblings have terminal degrees and they're all older than me. That was just sort of the modeling behavior that I had observed my entire life. So I applied to graduate school because they all have terminal degrees. That's the thing that you do. So I should have a terminal degree. And I ended up going to the Yale School of Drama and I got my MFA in stage management. And part of that program includes an opportunity to join Actors Equity, which is the union that organizes and advocates on behalf of actors and stage managers in the US and Canada, but it's a different chapter in Canada. I got my equity card and I moved to the city. And so, sorry, that was 15 years ago that I moved to the city because, like I said, I'm older now. I've done almost every role at almost every level of production that's available in sort of this area of the country. So I've done off Broadway, on Broadway, national tours, readings, workshops, development, special events, now online streaming, except for it didn't stream. I've done almost every position. I've been a production assistant, an ASM, an SM, a PSM. I've been a rehearsal stage manager. I've been an audition monitor. I've sort of seen it from almost every angle at this point.
I would be curious, do you have a different mindset when you're walking in to work on Broadway versus doing a national tour versus off Broadway? Is your mindset shifting as you're kind of navigating through all these different spaces? Are they all pretty similar on a certain level?
One of the things that I always say is that the job is always going to be different because there are no hard and fast rules, right? And so it is all about adapting to the actual scenario that's in front of you, using the skill set and the experience that you have at your fingertips because you're actively engaged in practicing this work. Every single show is going to need something slightly different from you, and we owe every production that we do the respect of actually acknowledging the needed work instead of just checking off boxes and going through the motions. I think the work is too important. The safety is too important. The emotional safety of the people involved is too important to not be as specific and intentional as possible at any given time. And so it has less to do with the specific venue, if you will, if you want to say Broadway's a venue or off Broadway's a venue or touring is a venue or whatever. It has less to do with the location of the production and it has more to do with what the production demands. And often the venue will lead to what the production demands. We're talking about the financials. The stakes are so high on Broadway because the investment is so high and the recoupment opportunity is so small. And all the producer is pushing for is recoupment so that they can start to make a profit, right? And so a lot of decisions come from on their end, and that trickles down to the work that the stage manager often does, has to do with the enormous financial stakes. And that is very different. Also, often on a Broadway production, for example, there's a bigger stage management team. There are more stage crew. There is someone for every role. And when you're working off Broadway, often that's not the case. Often there is a staff technical director at the off-Broadway venue, but maybe not someone who is specifically assigned to props. And the venue is hoping that the assistant stage manager, or maybe the stage manager, because maybe there isn't even an assistant stage manager, will be willing and or have the time to sort of take that on. And that is debatable in terms of whether or not that's great behavior on the part of that producer, you know. And so those are conversations that may or may not come up depending on the venue that you're going into. But ultimately, every single production is going to be specific and have specific needs. And so it's just like I was saying with the conversation that the person you may be in conflict with, you know, when we were talking 25 minutes ago, it's a matter of listening and observing and having an actual conversation with what's actually in front of you instead of just going through the motions and saying, because it's Broadway, this is my job. Because it's off Broadway, this is my job. Because this is just a 29-hour reading, this is my job, and this is all I'm going to do, and this is all that's going to be asked of me. Because I know from having worked with every single possible personality, everyone thinks that the stage manager's job is different from the next person. And so I have to read the room. That was a very long-winded way of saying I have to read the room.
Well, moral of the story.
Right. I mean, that is the job. The job is being able to read the room.
Yeah. Do you get nervous like walking into, you've worked on like Miz, Wicked, Once Less Island. Do you get nervous walking into such a high stakes position?
I always get nervous, but the nerves have to do with respect for the work that has been done before I walk in the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
My job, I started saying this about 8 years ago, and now it's starting to sound like a poster to me. Like I framed it and I put it on my wall, but I didn't. But I've said it so many times that it sounds a little bit trite, but fundamentally, it's my job, like I say, to read the room. And so I always say I'm supposed to be the water, not the rock, right? I'm supposed to find the path and flow with the path as opposed to standing as an obstacle in the way of the water that is trying to find a way through. It's my job to continue with the continued motion, right? Obviously, I didn't join Les Mis when it started. I joined it as it was mid-motion. Wicked, for sure. I came in 12 years into the run of that show. Like I say, reading the room and being the water, not the rock, right? My respect has to, or my fear and my nerves have to do with how fast can I learn everything that I need to know and be capable of understanding this particular show and the needs of this particular group of people so that I can serve in the best possible way. The fastest that I cannot be a burden, the better I feel. And so my nerves have to do with getting up to speed and being the best fit, walking in the door and being able to be the person they need me to be, while also sort of retaining my own personality in the process, because I think that I bring something important to the table. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been hired. So I'm not a chameleon. I am Anne. But I also have to be the Anne that they need me to be. I can't just be the Anne standing in the middle of the river demanding that the water go around me.
That's a great analogy. I like that a lot.
Oh, thank you. So it doesn't sound like a poster that I just put on my wall. That's good. I'm glad that it's still fresh.
Yeah. How do you decide which work to take? I
Mm.
would imagine at this point in your career, you could maybe, I don't know, I shouldn't assume, but can kind of pick, okay, this isn't quite what I want. I'll wait for something else. How do you decide what to take?
I still feel, and I've been in the city and in the union now for 15 and a half years, and I still feel like to a certain degree, I am not in a position to turn down work. I have to earn a certain number of weeks of work in order to earn my health insurance, which total side disaster of this pandemic is that none of us are earning work weeks and we're all going to lose our health insurance. But I have to earn my health insurance. I have to pay my mortgage. I have to feed my sweet dog that won't shut up and stop distracting me while I'm recording this podcast with you. I have responsibilities, and I am a grown person that is responsible for myself. And so I can't be picky. I don't have a safety net. I have to provide my own safety net. And sometimes that means saying yes to something. I do have boundaries. There are certain lines that I have drawn for myself because I have been in enough emotionally unhealthy situations at this point that I'm starting to be able to read red flags, and also, instead of saying, I see that red flag, but I'm not in a position to turn down work, and so I will work around that red flag. Some red flags now are actually not worth working around. So I sort of had to figure out where those lines are for me, and also continue reading the room, right? Like nothing is ever set in stone. My boundaries can shift. The boundaries of other people can shift. Other people's behavior toward me can change. So it's sort of a matter of reading the room and asking the right questions in an interview, and asking for what I truly need. Because a lot of the time, what I'm finding at this point in my career, as people are starting to look at me, has to be healthy, has to be functional, and there are enough people with whom it is healthy and functional that I want to be free to gravitate towards those people, which then makes me nervous because what if I never work in this town again? I have to be able to pay my mortgage. It's all sort of economic anxiety and panic, and then trying to quell that and continue to sort of stand my ground for the things that are most important to me. Specifically, I have a couple of situations in just the last year where both times I was up for a PSM position that I really, really wanted. In both cases, I wanted these jobs. And in one case, I felt very passed over for very bad reasons. But then when I step back and I look at the situation, I realize that all of those bad reasons that I was passed over for mean that I would not want to work for that person in that situation, which means that it was a gift that they passed me over. And in the other situation, it was an off-Broadway position, and so the money wasn't actually enough for me to be able to pay my bills. And I asked for my very basic, living conditions minimum, and they fought me tooth and nail on it, and it fell apart because of that. Even though that meant that I was unemployed, I still stand by my decision to say, if the job doesn't cover my bills, then that is exploitative, and I'm no longer going to be exploited.
Yeah, you brought up one of my favorite topics, like advocation.
Uh-huh.
That's something that was my goal for this year, is to work on advocating for myself, and then everything shut down. So I was like, shoot,
I know.
maybe next year.
Yeah. It's really hard. It makes my whole body hot sometimes when I
Yeah.
find myself in the middle of a situation where I have had to create a boundary. It makes me crazy that I have to create that boundary sometimes. Do you know what I mean? The fact that
Yeah.
it's not that there isn't a mutual respect about this very fundamental thing, whatever it may be, whether or not it's salary or working conditions or whatever it is, it makes my whole body hot to have to express that sometimes. And it is really a learned discomfort to be able to say, I feel this feeling and it is still worth it, and I'm going to push through to continue to maintain this boundary. Because in the end, it's not exorbitant. I am a human being.
Yeah, and it helps with longevity, right? Like, as a musician,
Yeah.
if I keep taking gigs that only pay, $40 a service, like, I'm not gonna last. Like, I'm gonna burn out. I'm gonna get frustrated. So it helps you stay in the career when you turn things down sometimes, I think.
That's exactly right. And asking for what I need, if I get it, that means that who I am asking, how's my grammar working? It means that the person from whom I am asking it might be more inclined to offer it to the next person, and the next person might not have to advocate for themselves. I have been thinking a lot the last couple of years about modeling behavior as I've moved more into a position of leadership in the industry. That is a form of modeling behavior, is self-advocacy, and also carving out more safety and more support for stage managers in the world.
I love that. I've never thought of it from that perspective. I like that. I love that.
Oh, thank you. Good. Let's all do it. Let's do it.
Yeah. You've mentioned leadership a lot. I'd love to talk about that. When you're in a leadership position, whether that's like a production stage manager or, just a stage manager, how do you create a good team environment when you're in a leadership position?
Well, I think that the word I'm looking for is respect. And as the word was trying to come out of my face, I realized that that respect is actually like a multi-sided die, if you will. Like when I'm talking about like Dungeons and Dragons dice that have like 20 sides, right? Like the word respect can mean 100,000 different things, but all roads, when it comes to leadership and team building, all roads lead to and from respect. Yes, everyone does have to be on the same wavelength, but that doesn't mean that everyone on the team should think alike necessarily. Absolutely, the person who is at the, shall we say, top of the team, which is something that I agree that the PSM in a team scenario is the person at the top of the team, but rather than thinking of hierarchy, I'd rather think of it in terms of like tone setting, because everyone has individual responsibilities and is the leader of any given project at any given time. So the PSM, less than being the top of any particular ladder, is more of the tone setter and the sort of strategy person, right? The person who's going to divide things up so that everyone can move forward and succeed and report back and share news and all of that stuff. But if every single person on the team had the exact same strengths, then there would be things that aren't as well looked after, because you can't be perfect at everything. And so when you're building a team, you have to be able to put together a group of people that trust each other and absolutely respect each other, but also think differently and have different strengths and have different perspectives and outlooks on life. And that's where intersectionality comes into play again. Everyone on the team should not look alike and come from the same background and have the same experiences, because when you're going into a production experience, you don't know what the production is going to throw at you necessarily. So everyone should be able to look at any given challenge from a ton of different perspectives and be able to speak to how they are seeing it, so that we can come up as a team with the best strategy for making it a smooth solution. And so as a leader, being able to listen to everyone on the team and trust their perspective and fold that into the decision making and the strategizing and the tone setting is critical, just absolutely critical. Ensuring that everyone on the team feels empowered, and not just on the team, but I feel very strongly as a stage manager from any role on the team, as the PA, as the ASM, as the PSM, as whoever, because we divide and conquer as a team, right? Because like there are 100,000 projects to do and we're all doing something different. One of us is, running stage left. One of us is running stage right. One of us is calling the show. One of us is on book. We all have different responsibilities in that moment, and we're all trusted and empowered to do those things. But in those roles, we are trusting and empowering the people around us, the people on the deck. Our job is to empower the crew. Our job is to empower the actors and make sure that they feel strongest and safest to be able to go out on stage. The person calling the show has to empower the people that are running all of their different boards and computers and all of the things, the spotlight operators, all of that stuff. We're empowering those people to do their best work. So it's not about declarations and dictatorship. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive and do their best work.
Oh, I wish all of our leaders in every capacity, political, whatever, would thought that way.
It's very disappointing. Like, it is deeply frustrating and disappointing to see just absolute failure of leadership at epic levels. And it's brutal to have to live through it and feel pretty powerless. That's a drag.
Yeah.
I'm not into it. I am not at all into it.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, if I'm like deep in a bad experience, right, I'll go to therapy and my therapist will instantly say, do you want to switch careers? And I'm always like, but everyone has conflict with the people around them. And so, no matter who you are, what we're seeing that translate in, oh God, this is a terrible analogy because I'm starting from this like petty grievances place and trying to take it to this big place. But what I'm trying to say is that the things that we are witnessing that are challenging at a national level, right? The like major social change that we are advocating for, that is so necessary and so long coming, that then we're seeing in the microcosm of theater. That's also happening in every single pocket of American society, right? Like, we're seeing it in the magazine industry, we're seeing it in the food industry, we're seeing it in the running community for sure. We're seeing it in every single specific pocket, in addition to on the political level. And so one thing that we do have control over is our behaviors and our professional experience, and making it better in our small, tiny little bubble of theater and live performance, because we cannot control Mitch McConnell and the poisonous behavior that he engages in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very easy to be critical of others, which we definitely need to do to some level, but at the same time, we also need to be critical of ourselves, right? And we all have power. We all have some sort of power, and how are we using whatever amount of power we've been given to help others and to speak out and
That's right. And ensure that the spaces that we inhabit are safe spaces. That at least the spaces that we inhabit are safe for everybody. And also hold our national leaders accountable. But using Mitch McConnell as an example again, I don't think Mitch McConnell is listening to me. I will shout about him because I believe in adding my voice to the general shouting. But then there are things that I can control, and I will do everything that I can to do everything that I can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You've talked about trust. You've mentioned the trust word. How do you build trust as a stage manager with the people that you work with?
That's a great question because it's so important. So like it is 1,000% critical. And you see, it's one of those things that you can point at the absence of it more easily than you can point at the presence of it. But when it falls apart, it can fall apart in really dangerous ways, and so emotionally and physically. And so there's almost nothing more important than trust, and it absolutely 1,000% has to be earned. You can't just say, "I'm trustworthy, let's go for it." And it all has to do with behavior. That you make statements and you put framework in place. I talk a lot when I talk about stage management. When people say, "Oh, you're the person that makes the rules." I say, well, what I do is I create a frame so that there is a safe fence around any given space so that artists can do everything that they need to do in order to create the art, right? I create really nice, tight boundaries so that people can thrive in an environment. And so as I'm reading the room and putting the right fencing in place so that people can do the thing that they need to do for this given particular specific experience and creative endeavor, rather than making a bunch of statements and then not living by them, everything has to be cohesive. And only by making eye contact and making sure that people know that they are safe by doing everything that I can to ensure that they know that it has everything to do with that and not about like arbitrary rule creation. It has to come through experience with a person. And that's one of the things, when I talk about coming into a show that's already open as opposed to creating something together with a company, when I say that I'm really nervous, and it has everything to do with getting up to speed as quickly as possible. Part of that is building trust with everyone as quickly as possible, but it has to be done through experience, right? So like when I went into Wicked, the first thing that you learn when you join Wicked as a stage manager is one of the deck tracks, and every single one of the deck tracks has a whole bunch of safety things involved in it, whether it's clipping someone in before they fly or calling their flight pattern or ensuring that the trapdoor closes after their head is clear of it or whatever it is. There are all these different things that we have to do, and the actors and the crew have to trust me, the stage manager, to do those things safely, because otherwise there can be dramatic repercussions. And the only way that I can earn that trust is by building it from scratch, because these people don't know me. You can't stop. You can't assume, you can't hope that other people will assume that you're just going to be great. You have to earn it. You have to actively participate and engage, and then continue to earn it once it has been earned, because you can lose trust also. So you never get to stop.
And you can lose trust so quickly. Like, you could spend years building trust and establishing a reputation, but I mean, you can lose it instantly.
That's absolutely right. That's completely true. So it's just so important to always be worthy of it. Yeah, especially in the position that we're in as stage managers.
Yeah, I can't imagine that level of responsibility. Like, I just play bass. Like, no one is like, I'm not gonna endanger anyone. I just stand in my little corner.
But you don't. I don't want to get into your head, but like when I'm on a musical, right, as the stage manager, I field complaints from the actors about the band. And it's not a value judgment. It's not them just needing to blow off steam about how bad the band is. It's about the fact that the band is throwing them off. The band
Sure.
is making it hard for them to do the steps, if the band isn't following the conductor that night, and so they're not maintaining the correct tempo, or the horn player blew the wrong note again for the third time this week, and it's at a critical moment in the choreography, or like there's so many different things. Or sometimes it just has to do with the mix of the show, right? Like the performers can't hear a particular instrument, but that is the thing they really need to follow to ensure that they're in time. You're not just playing the bass, it's an ecosystem. Everything, we have to create an environment for everyone to thrive and everyone to be able to do their best work. Otherwise, it will really start to crack and crumble. So everyone has to be empowered and able to, just shine.
Yeah, that's very true. That's one of the unique things about theater is that everyone's job is so different, and yet we're all working on the same project. Like I think, as a musician, sometimes I play in orchestras or jazz bands, and like yeah, a violinist role is different from a cello player's role, but I mean we're all making music. But in theater, you have people making so many different things and coming from different backgrounds, and they're everyone's jobs look so drastically different, but yet we all come together to create this one product. And I just think that's just so I think that's so beautiful.
I totally agree. It's one of the reasons why when my therapist says, "Do you want to change careers?" I can't go
Yeah.
down that path, because nothing is like this. Nothing is
Yeah.
like what we do. It's so magical.
Yes. All right. So, my last question I like to ask everyone is what advice would you give to young stage managers who have just, maybe finished up college and moved to a new town and, want to get in the scene or get on Broadway? What advice would you give to them?
Oh gosh. I think that there are two things that come to mind immediately. One of them is the piece of advice that I got just as I was finishing graduate school, which was one of the most useful pieces of advice that I heeded, which was not to decide ahead of time whether or not I would like something. And it specifically had to do with touring. I was doing a mock interview with a very well regarded production supervisor, and he asked me in the mock interview if I'd be interested in touring. And I said, "Nah, I don't think so. I don't think that's for me." And he asked me what I knew about touring, and I knew almost nothing. And he said, "Why would you decide in a vacuum that something might not be for you without ever trying it on for size?" And I ended up touring for 6 years and loving it. And so that specific sort of kernel, which it can be applied to so many things, and I did apply it to so many things in addition to touring. But it was just a really useful sort of back of my mind guide, was why say no to something if I don't have all of the information. That having been said, I would also say to young people, make healthy choices. There is a massive problem with a culture of exhaustion in our industry and
Hmm.
martyrdom. And there is a huge message out there that real stage managers are first ones in the door and last ones out at the end of the night. There is a level of martyrdom in that messaging that means that often people will put themselves past their limits, or not ask for help, or not say, "It's already been 16 hours, I'm done for the day." If it didn't get done, that's actually not my fault. It's a staffing issue. There aren't enough of me to go around. There wasn't enough put into the budget. It's not my fault that I'm not willing to work 17 hours instead of 16. 16 is actually twice the limit that I'm supposed to be working. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's a terrible example because I've gone to extremes, but at a certain point, you are also a human being and an individual. And that's where the self advocacy comes in, and why I try to self advocate from my position so that maybe people won't have to advocate for the same things in the future. But even as a young person, even as someone starting out, you can say no when you are put in a position that makes you uncomfortable or pushes you past your limit. And we need to start as leaders, as people who have come before, being able to hear that no without it being a threat to your ability to continue in this business. So that's sort of a two-sided thing. But, anyone working for me in the future, please trust that I am constantly working to be a person that will hear you when you say no. And I'm getting better and better at it the more I actively practice at it. And so please feel empowered to say no, at least with me and hopefully with other people who are leaders in the business as well.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.